Hi everybody, Paul Gallagher. I want to talk today about, it might be regarded as a slightly sketchy subject, and it's called previsualization. So what exactly is previsualization? It sounds all very arty and sort of convoluted, but basically what previsualization is us trying to have some understanding of what we want the finished photograph to look like before we dive in and start playing around with the controls of Lightroom and Photoshop and Adobe Camera Raw. What do we want it to look like? And how are we going to put that in place? Now, pre-visualization's been around for a long, long time. Myself, using black and white film, I couldn't visualize or see what an scene was going to look like in an image in black and white when I was stood there with my camera when I was using film, because everything's in colour. So it doesn't look black and white at all. So I had to train myself to imagine what certain bricks or trees or rivers would look like in tones of grey, to get an understanding of whether the photograph would actually work in the first place. Was it worth me making the photograph, exposing that sheet of film? So pre-visualization is a really important thing. It's been used in the movie industry for ages and ages and ages. They have previs teams, experts that draw storyboards of what the scene should look like to look scary, or what the scene should look like to look cozy and warm, and what colours they should use and where the people should stand in the scene. They've been doing it for a long, long time. And what it mostly applies to in the digital age is when we get back at base and when we've got our raw file, because that's where pre-visualization for the digital age becomes difficult, because the raw file doesn't look much like when you were stood there with your camera, and there lies the problem. If you skip back to when you were out with your camera, scenes look completely different. You picture things in your mind and they look entirely different. It's like this picture. This was taken in Abraham Lake in Canada, and it didn't look like this at all. It was nothing like this. What it looked like, it was very, very cool blue here. I mean, the sky up there you can see is blue. This down here looks green, a yellowy green. In reality, it wasn't like that at all. And what we need to do is try and keep things simple, try and have this picture in our minds, what we're trying to create, and then apply the simplest of techniques to get to the finished picture. And the reason why I say that is that if we get the techniques too complicated, too long and convoluted and too techy, and we're using too many things, then we're focusing or concentrating on the technology rather than the picture. And that's what we're here for. We're photographers to make great pictures, and great pictures that sum up what it was like when we were there with our cameras. That's the whole idea. Okay, and there's got to be an emotional connection as well. It can't just be technical. You've got to remember, how was it cold? How did it smell? Was the wind blowing on that day? Was the ice cracking beneath my feet? Yes, it was, and it was very nerve-wracking sometimes because you felt like you were going to fall through the ice. So yeah, there's all of these factors need to be taken into consideration, but simplicity is best. The simplest technique is best. Okay, so looking at this raw file now, considering the raw file, well, the story behind the picture is this. We walked out onto the ice, and you have to walk quite a way into the lake to get to the area where the snow isn't on the ice. The reason for that is quite simple, because when you're in the middle of the lake, Abraham Lake, that's where the winds blow the hardest. And when the winds blow very hard, they blow the snow off the surface of the ice, leaving this pristine ice. Through it you can see the bubbles, the methane bubbles that come from the base of the lake and freeze near the surface, and you get this fantastic phenomena of the bubbles on Abraham Lake. Now, when I was there, the scene was pretty simple. It was this kind of like, sort of diamond shape or triangle shape at the top. The clouds were going in the opposite direction, and the ice here in the foreground. These bubbles are so fantastic and amazing to walk around and see them. One of the issues I did have is that the people that I was with left their camera bags right in the middle of the scene. But that wasn't a problem. We'd get rid of that at a later date. So what were the considerations for taking it? I used a tilt and shift lens because I wanted these to be super sharp in the foreground, and also the top of the mountain to be super sharp in the distance. But I had to use filtration. And so I had to put a hard graduated filter right down to the base of the mountain here, okay? And the reason why I did that is because these clouds up here were really quite bright, okay? So that was the point in the image that was determining my exposure. Now, I couldn't put a heavier graduated filter on because the base of the mountain here was already going dark. So I thought, well, that's as far as I can go. So I made the exposure, I kept this in, and the graduated filter helped me with that, but darkened the base of the mountain. One of the challenges is that it's kind of kill the light on the mountain here. So when I'm pre-visualizing now, I'm trying to remember back that these cloud structures were great, but to retain them, which is essential, I've basically compressed all the tones in the rest of the image. I mean, this looks yellow. That's because it's yellowy green. That's because it's the sunlight. The sunlight was quite warm. But in reality, that's the way the cameras collected it. But in reality, this is quite a cool blue. It was very, very contrasty, and it was white against very dark, cool blue. So that's what it looked like in reality. The sunlight is obviously coming from this direction and lipping over the top of the mountain there. And the shadow detail wasn't as dark. Once again, that's been introduced because of the graduated filter. So in post-production, what I had to do is return this kind of coolness down here, get rid of the yellows. It goes without saying, I had to get rid of the 3 bags. I don't want that in my photograph. And really, it was just returning back some of the light in the mountain here and some of the shadow, but making the overall image look crisp, making it look clean and crisp. That's what it was all about. So I'd made this set of decisions prior to touching any slider, just looking at it like this in RAW, prior to touching any slider. What do I need to do to return back to the way I wanted, or for it to represent what I wanted the finished picture to be? The light hitting the top of the mountains, the cool shadows here, the structure of the clouds, the coolness of the blues down here, and also the contrast in the foreground, the separation between the whites of the bubbles and the dark depths of the frozen ice. So what did the finished image look like when I completed it? It looked like this. Now that is far more like, it represents what it was like when I was there. Far more. You can see the light up here, lipping around the front of the mountain. That light really bears resemblance to the light that's hitting the water here. You notice the clouds up there on the left haven't changed that much. That's fine. They were okay. It's just a bit more structure in there with a bit more clarity maybe. But we can see the mountains in the distance there. They appear to be getting the same light sources up here. Okay, and the foreground speaks for itself. It's got that cool blue, but you've got the separation between the whites of the bubbles and the dark water there. If I open the 2 images side by side, now we can see the journey from there to there. So everything I described, the shadow detail here, has been introduced here. Okay, the coolness in the water has been introduced here. A bit more structure in the cloud has been achieved from a kind of baseline level there. And the overall tone of the image has been introduced back to the way it was when I was stood there. So we mustn't lose sight of the fact that, it's a journey from what the camera can do to what you need to do to introduce a photograph that represents what it was like when you were there. Never ever assume that the camera, no matter how expensive it is, with the best filters, with the best lenses, on the best tripod, can ever give you this over here. It can't. It gets all the tones and all the brightness range, helped with filters, and compresses them all down. And what we need to do when we return is reintroduce the light, is reintroduce the mood, the theme, the essence of the moment you stood there. That is what it's all about. Okay, so this is the basis of pre-visualization.